Before the break, we asked our audience the question, should the Canadian government do more to address religious persecution overseas? And here's how they voted. 80% said yes, 20 no. And for our TV viewers, send your answers to the addresses that you see right there on the screen. Our guest now is Andy Bannister, who writes and speaks internationally about the ideas that underlie today's religious and cultural conflicts. He's a visiting lecturer for Wycliffe Hall at Oxford and a thought leader with Ravi Zacharias Ministries in Canada. Andy, thanks for being here.
Good to be with you as ever, Lorna.
Tell us now, then, the root cause of religious persecution.
That's a great question, actually, because religious persecution is everywhere. If you look at the numbers, they're frankly astonishing. Something like, 200 million Christians around the world, to speak of Christians alone, live under daily threat of persecution. Now, if you look at the studies that have been done, and there are more and more coming out, really the common denominator, if we're going to identify one, lying behind religious persecution of all kinds, is really where the state gets involved in regulating religion, whether it's in Muslim countries or atheistic countries. When the government of the day, when the state begins trying to regulate religious expression, problems begin to arise. So
tell us then, how does a state's worldview or cultural approach affect the religious freedom landscape?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, if you look around the world at where persecution is happening, there are really two ways that states can try and regulate religion. They can try and regulate it using the full force of the state. So that happens in places like China. So communist government there, very, very heavy regulation of religion. For a long time, all religion was banned. From Hinduism and Islam right through to Christianity. Now it's loosening up slightly, but if you're a Christian in China, and they're one of the largest growing Christian populations in the world, unless you go to the state church, the Three Self Church, life can get quite exciting quite quickly, and the government will clamp down on you, arresting leaders and dispersing house churches. But the other way a state can regulate religion is through simply allowing social pressure to build up, or even encouraging social pressure, so spreading rumours and misinformation, that kind of thing, so that then basically the other religious groups in the country do your work for you. That happens in places like Iran, for example.
And Pakistan. I follow on Twitter the case of Asia Bibi. You've written about Asia.
Yes, I have, that's right.
And that's an incredible case of societal pressure building and a woman languishing on death row there. Tell us how a government just can let that go. Well, and they say we've got religious freedom, but the social pressures tells a different story.
Well, exactly. I mean, Pakistan is a really interesting test case because sitting on the Pakistani statute book is a law called the 295C blasphemy law. And basically, if you are even so much as accused of insulting Islam, the Quran, or Muhammad, that can end up with a death sentence. So in the case of Asia Bibi, the woman you mentioned, in her case, what happened, she had a dispute with a neighbour and some in her village over the use of a well. She drank from this well. Her Muslim neighbours said she was a Christian, and so she'd made the water unclean. And argument broke out, and then later, about 24 hours after that argument, a neighbour went, in the course of this argument, she blasphemed, she criticised Muhammad, the founder of Islam. Well, at that point, all hell broke loose, and riots broke out. The police had to intervene to rescue her, in inverted commas, but actually arrested her. She's been charged, and she's now languishing on death row, and it doesn't look very pretty indeed. And so many commentators would say what the Pakistani government need to do is take that law off the statute book. But two high-profile politicians who've campaigned for that in the last year have both ended up dead. And so by the very act of putting that law on the statute book, they didn't even need to prosecute people. It's simply the very threat of it is enough to cause problems.
And both of those assassinated parliamentarians in Pakistan were part of motivating why Canada opened its Religious Freedom Office.
Right.
But you are emphatic. The problem is not Islam. The problem is not Muslims. It is Sharia. What do you mean? Well,
I mean by that a couple of things, Lorna. One is that when we start talking about these things, and when you look at the statistics for persecution worldwide, religious persecution, the two types of country that come top are atheistic countries like China, Burma, North Korea, and then closely behind Muslim countries. Now, that becomes very difficult very quickly because you get accused of tarring all Muslims with this brush. So when you begin to dig a bit more closely, I think you see it's not Islam per se, it's not Muslims per se. We need to be very careful to open that distinction up. The problem is Sharia, because built into Sharia, the law code built into Islam, really are very heavy penalties for apostasy, that's leaving Islam. So if you're a Muslim and you convert to a different religion, you can face the death sentence, and apostasy if you criticize Muhammad or some of the core tenets of Islam. And because those are built into Sharia, and Sharia is a ready-made system of religious regulation on the shelf, if you're a government in a Muslim country, particularly one trying to gain traction with the Muslim conservatives in your country, it's very tempting to apply Sharia, and in applying Sharia, then those apostasy and blasphemy regulations come in with it, and suddenly it becomes very difficult for religious minorities.
We all have relationships with moderate Muslims. They are not supportive of Sharia. Are there factors within that relationship world with moderate Muslims that could help for religious freedoms?
Well, there are two issues there. I think one is we need to look at how many people are lobbying for Sharia. I mean, even here in the West, you'd be surprised. 40% of British Muslims say they want Sharia. We have Sharia courts in England. Here in Canada, a few years ago, there were attempts, if you recall, to bring Sharia in.
Shut it all down. Yeah.
Interestingly, it was moderate Muslims, or moderate Muslim women were one of the lobby groups who spoke up and lobbied against that. So I think we need to strengthen the moderate voice. Absolutely. I think that's important to be doing. I think it's also important to be talking about reciprocity. You see, here in Canada, in North America as a whole, in Europe, Muslims have huge freedoms, and that's a wonderful thing. And what I think we need to be doing is encouraging in pretty strong terms Muslim leaders, both moderate and perhaps not so moderate, to say, you know, the West has given them a great gift. They can come here, they can practice Islam freely, but it is not enough merely to do that. We need to be putting pressure on and strongly encouraging them to be speaking up for the same freedoms for those who are not Muslims in the countries from which they've originated.
Andy Bannister, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Now it's time to find out what you think. Have you or someone you know experienced severe religious persecution? Send us your answers by phone, email, Facebook, or Twitter, or leave a video message on our website. I'd love to know what you think, so be part of the conversation. And our studio audience is taking a live vote, and I'll have those results when we come back. All right, coming up, we talk with a man whose life work is to remind us of the tragic and inspiring stories of persecuted people around the world. Thank you, Andy. That was great.